After being killed in a mission, a local sheriff named Roy is designated to become part of the police department for dead people. While trying to get revenge for his death, he discovers that his death is connected with a much darker plan in which a demon wants to control the earth. In a minefield in Red Creek, Utah, in the year 1876, a man is breaking a hole in the ground in hopes of finding some gold. As the total lunar eclipse happens, a spirit comes out of the hole and possesses the man. At this time, the man is wailing as a burning mark appears on his chest. He then stands up and opens his eyes, which turn black. 1 month later, in the town of Horseshoe in Wyoming, Roy picks up his daughter Charlotte and her fiancé Angus from the train station. Roy is quite doubtful of Angus, but Charlotte says he has to accept Angus as his son-in-law because he makes her feel happy and safe. However, their reunion gets interrupted when 5 brothers led by a man named Zeke Samuels show up. Seeing the brothers kidnap other civilians, Roy gets Charlotte inside the station. Before Roy leaves, Charlotte begs him to keep Angus safe. Afterward, Roy takes cover in a stack of luggage as he exchanges gunfire with 3 enemies. Then all of a sudden, Zeke appears behind him. Luckily, Roy manages to shoot him in the head and he rolls under the train, planning to go around the 3 others. However, he doesn't notice that someone is on the train pointing a gun at him. As the man pulls the trigger, Roy is suddenly transported to an unfamiliar place. There, a woman named Hano welcomes him to the afterlife. Hearing that he's already dead, he immediately asks about Charlotte, to which Hano answers that his daughter is still alive. Afterward, Hano proceeds to explain that upon reviewing Roy's files, he is designated to the RIPD, or the Rest in Peace Department. She then introduces herself as the captain of RIPD, West American Division. According to Hano, RIPD is God's police force assigned to fight the Deados. Confused, Roy asks what is a Deado. Hano says that the Deados are the souls of the dead that escaped their judgment and are still hanging around on the earth. The presence of the Deados on Earth threatens all of humanity. Hano then takes Roy to the armory. Amazed, Roy picks up the gun that's most appealing to him. Hano commends his choice, but Roy points out that he's loyal to his old gun. However, Hano points out that his gun is useless against the Deados. Only the RIPD weapons will exterminate them for good. Roy continues to look around the armory when he finds a symbol on the ground. Hano says that it's called the Ouroboros, which signifies life, death, and rebirth. After a soul possesses a human, the symbol will appear in its torso. Roy finally asks what he is doing at RIPD. Hano explains that during the total eclipse that happened in Red Creek about a month ago, some sort of what they call hellish discharge happened. If Roy signs up for the mission, they will send him back to Earth. Hearing this, Roy immediately agrees. But Hano knows very well what Roy is thinking. She points out that Roy shouldn't get revenge for his death and that he must prioritize the mission to Red Creek. After Roy accepts the mission, Hano is about to read him his contract, but Roy bails out of it. And to officially signify his membership, his chest starts to burn as the brand of RIPD appears on his skin. Before Hano sends Roy back to Earth, she reminds him that in 2 days, humanity will end if he fails on the mission. The scene changes to Roy stepping out of the portable toilet, when he's suddenly tackled by a running bison. Then, a woman riding a horse shows up. She introduces herself as Jean, and she will look after Roy in this mission. Roy says that he doesn't need someone to look after him because he's used to working alone, but Jean insists that she was ordered by Hano. Roy wants seniority in the mission, but Jean argues that Roy has only been dead for 3 days while she has been dead for 445 years. Pissed, Roy dismisses Jean's remarks and leaves. Meanwhile, Zeke and his men are kidnapping people again. When the law enforcers arrive, they engage in a shootout with Zeke's group. Going back to Roy, he goes home to his daughter, but Jean drags him away. Roy fights with Jean for stopping him from seeing his daughter. Their fight ends with a draw as they manage to point their weapons at each other. Jean finally reveals to Roy that he cannot see Charlotte because he doesn't look the same anymore. In his wife and his wife's tombs, Roy looks at the mirror and sees that he and Jean appear to be black women. But this doesn't change Roy's mind. He still wants to talk to his daughter. Getting the picture of himself and Charlotte from his grave, Roy plans to go back to his daughter. But Jean stops him once more, saying that whatever he tries to say to Charlotte will only come out as random gibberish. At this time, Roy's best friend named Henry arrives and sees the 2 ladies. Jean introduces herself as Maltide and Roy as Mabel. She then invents a story about how they met Roy so they do not look suspicious. While Henry is telling them how good of a person Roy is, he unintentionally reveals that Angus was kidnapped by the Samuels. He also adds that 3 of the 5 Samuels were apprehended by the US Marshals during the incident in the bank. Hearing this, Roy wants to go save Angus for the sake of his daughter. However, Jean stands firm that Angus is not part of their mission, but this doesn't stop Roy from trying to rescue Angus. With no other choices, Jean has to follow Roy. After a while, Roy and Jean wait for their carriage where their brothers are being transported. At this time, Roy shares with Jean that Zeke and his brothers were once good and God-fearing people. According to their mother Doris, one day, her 5 sons went out to work on an old well. Later that night, the young men came back as a crazy bunch of delinquents. Roy then remembers that on the day he died, he managed to shoot Zeke in the head, and he's confident that he has killed him. Jean mocks him that maybe he's not as sharpshooter as he claims to be. When they spot the carriage where the Samuels are, they are surprised to see that they are carrying the Ouroboros symbol. Realizing that the Samuels are deados, Jean finally agrees to help Roy. They ambush the marshals who are guarding the brothers. Afterward, Roy is trying to open up the locked cage but fails. Jean also can't find the key and decides to pop one of the brothers using holy water instead. Popping a deado means forcing them to reveal their real appearance, hiding behind the human flesh they possessed. As a deado breaks out of the cage, Roy immediately exterminates it. The 2 other brothers show up and try to restrain Roy, but Jean quickly kills one of them while the other one is left alive for interrogation. Roy then discovers that the one they left alive, whose name is Slim, is the one that was said to have killed him. He confronts Slim about it, but he denies the accusation, saying that someone framed him for Roy's murder. Roy wants to kill him, but Jean says they need information from him first. Spurting a little holy water on Slim, he slowly starts to pop. Jean stops the popping by poking a crucifix into him after Slim agrees to cooperate with them. According to Slim, there's a deado named Otis who is so powerful that he managed to force him and his brothers to kidnap people to deliver them to Red Creek. Roy asks what Otis is doing with the kidnapped victims, to which Slim answers that Otis is just imprisoning them. Although he doesn't know what Otis's plan is exactly, Slim is sure that it is something big. Jean gets confused because other deados cannot wipe out other deados. Slim then points at Roy's gun and says that Otis has one of those RIPD weapons. Realizing that the situation is worse than they thought, Roy, Jean, and Slim start traveling to Red Creek. Meanwhile, a woman named Nell reports to Otis that Zeke's group adds 8 more people to their collection of prisoners. Otis wants to send the crew for another hunt, but Nell says Zeke doesn't want to follow him anymore. As it turns out, other deados are doubtful of Otis's origin and real identity. Hearing this, Otis explains to her that during the eclipse, he escapes through a limbo when a fragment of the gateway grows weak. He continues that tonight's blood moon will complete the tedratic lunar cycle, making the entire gateway weak. Then, the humans they gather will work excessively to dig up the gateway to accomplish Otis's plan to rule the earth. Afterward, Otis talks to Zeke about his dying faith in him. He punishes him by grabbing the soul that's possessing Zeke and then shoots it with an RIPD equalizer. Seeing this, other deados decide to follow Otis once again. Going back to the 3, Roy wants to exterminate Slim because he's just extra baggage for them. However, Jean declines, saying that a caught deado will be brought to Hano, where they will be redirected to hell. They will only kill deados if the situation requires them to. Later that night, as the blood moon appears, they finally arrive at Red Creek. They notice that the town is nearly empty and every citizen they see is sick. At this time, they try to check in the hotel, but the owner named Julius, who's also the mayor of the town, points to the sign that says people of color are not allowed in the hotel. Pissed, Roy shows his gun and forces the mayor to burn the sign. As the man burns the sign, Jean turns around because she seems afraid of fire. Then, Julius calls his black employee named Beverly and asks her to bring Roy and Jean to their room. There, Jean asks what ails the town and why it is nearly empty. Beverly says that no one knows what caused their sickness, but the citizens left the town because of a rumor of gold near Red Creek. That's what Julius tells them, at least. Hearing this, Roy and Jean begin to suspect Julius. When Beverly leaves, Jean shares her thoughts with Roy. Jean points to the mountains where the minefield is and suspects that it's what makes the people of the town sick. Her theory seems to be right, as the people were imprisoned in the minefield wear masks. A man loses consciousness and his daughter is about to remove her mask to revive him. But Angus stops her, saying that she will die if she takes off her mask. He then checks on the father and he assures the woman that her father just needs some rest. Afterward, Julius, whose condition is getting worse, goes to Otis and asks for a mask in exchange for all of the help he had given him. However, Otis insists that the masks are for his workers only. Julius begs him, saying that he doesn't want to die. Otis then mockingly tells the man that death isn't always bad. As he gives Julius a mask, Otis assures him that a new day will soon begin for all of mankind. Yet, as it turns out, the mask is just a trap. When Julius wears it, Otis's men tie him up and put him in a carriage. Back in the hotel, Slim is trying to convince Roy and Jean that he can help them. Taking pity on the man, Roy asks Jean if the real Slim can still be inside his body. But Jean says that the real Slim is gone and the Deado has complete control of his body now. After leaving Slim at the hotel room, Roy and Jean go to the church but find no one there. Then, all of a sudden, they hear a man screaming for help outside. They quickly help the man and discover that it's Julius. Asked what happened to him, Julius reveals that Otis captures the whole town and brings all of the prisoners to the minefield in the mountains. Jean recognizes the minefield as the gateway and realizes that a toxic gas is coming from the depths of hell. That's why it's killing all the people. After connecting the dots, Jean finally understands that Otis plans to use the prisoners to dig up the gateway, then turn all of them into Deados and the rest of the world. Roy asks why didn't Otis and his Deados do the digging since they're stronger than humans? According to Jean, God created a defense mechanism between Earth and Hell, and it is humanity. And only when humanity invites the soul back to Earth can the souls rise again. Hearing all of this, Julius laughs at them, thinking that they're crazy. Suddenly, Deados appear behind Roy and Jean to attack them. They try to fight back the Deados, but they are outnumbered. Meanwhile, when Beverly looks for Julius for his usual tea for the night, she discovers a flyer at his desk. After seeing its content, she helps Slim get out of his restraints. In turn, Slim gives Beverly a mask to save her life. He also gives her more spare masks and orders her to give them to everyone that's left in the town. The scene changes to the minefield where Roy and Jean are imprisoned. Nell arrives and seems to recognize Jean. As it turns out, Nell was once part of the RIPD and she robbed the armory after she betrayed the department. That's why Otis has an RIPD equalizer. But their conversation is interrupted when Angus tries to fight off the Deados guarding them. But he fails miserably. When Roy recognizes Angus, he realizes that Angus is a good man and he's the right man for Charlotte. At midnight, when the prisoners are rounded up, Otis and Nell talk to Roy and Jean. Otis tells them that it's too late for the RIPD to stop them. As the Deados take over the world, Otis will rule over Earth and turn it into the 10th circle of hell. Otis then orders Nell to bring the two RIPD officers to him at dawn so he can throw them into the abyss before the gateway closes. After Otis leaves, Nell mocks Jean that for someone afraid of fire, she will be burned for eternity in hell. It is then revealed that Jean's real name is Joan of Arc, the saint who was burned to death. Roy asks if they can do something if hell opens up. Jean reveals to him that while she is still alive, she managed to find a pendant that had the tears of Christ. Using this, they can extinguish the fire. To their surprise, Slim shows up and takes down the Deados guarding them. But before letting them go, Slim tells Jean that he wants a retrial on his case. On the other hand, he shows Roy the news flyer that Beverly found that proves that he was framed for Roy's death. After getting free, Jean tells Roy that he needs to drop the tears in the center of hell for their plan to work. However, he cannot go with them because she's afraid of fire. But Roy points out that she's been guarding the tears of Christ for 445 years and closing hell is her destiny. The scene then changes to the prisoners breaking a large hole in the ground, opening up hell. This causes damned souls to start possessing people. Angus warns the others that they shouldn't look at the souls or they will be possessed. Hearing this, Otis orders the Deados to force the prisoners to open their eyes. Slim then arrives, pretending to hold Roy at gunpoint. He tells Otis that Jean rebelled and killed the guards, so he killed her. Otis orders Slim to throw Roy into hell. After waiting for an opportunity, Slim shoots Otis, but a soul protects him. Roy orders Slim to help Angus in evacuating all the remaining humans while he fights Otis and other Deados. Unfortunately, a big Deado gets the advantage over him. Seeing this, Jean musters up all her courage and jumps over the pits of hell to drop the tears of Christ. She then kills the big Deado. Plunging her sword to the ground, she and Roy hold onto it as hell sucks everything upon its closing. Slim and the civilians are also holding onto the grills of the prison to avoid getting sucked. After the hell has been sealed off, Roy and Jean think that their mission is already done. Unfortunately for the two, Otis didn't get sucked into hell. Otis pops off and reveals himself to be Astaroth, the right hand of the devil himself. Roy picks up a shotgun and fires at Astaroth to distract him while Jean picks up her sword. However, Roy and Jean are no match for the powerful demon. Astaroth uses the souls to grab Roy and Jean, but she pulls out the crucifix which weakens the souls' grasp on them. Freed, Roy finds the tears of Christ and puts them on his gun. He then shoots Astaroth, exterminating him for good. As the sun rises, the prisoners go back to their families at Red Creek. Roy also confronts Julius about his death. Julius reveals that he was the one who shot him, but it's only because he thought Roy was one of the Samuels. But instead of killing him for revenge, Roy sends Julius to prison. With Slim as the temporary sheriff of Red Creek and Beverly as his deputy, they will bring peace and order back to the town. Before leaving, Roy and G remind Slim that they will be back for him when his retrial is set. Then the day of Charlotte and Angus's wedding arrives. Not being able to say a word that they can understand, Roy gives his message to Charlotte through a tight hug. Afterward, Roy and Jean get back to the portable toilet, the gateway to RIPD. Roy tells Jean that he's finally ready to enter heaven. Jean laughs at him after realizing he didn't read his contract. As it turns out, Roy will only go to heaven after serving the RIPD for 100 years. The movie ends with Roy getting hit by a running bison once again.